Welcome everybody. Yesterday we focused on sustainability, underlining its holistic connotation and therefore considering also the quality of wines as a marker of sustainability. We cannot imagine our daily social lifestyle without good wine. All important events in our life are accompanied by the best wine we have, the wine we favor, the wine we like. Wine becomes an expression of each individual's personality. Hence, its ranking from a consumer perspective cannot be reduced to computations of economic and environmental impacts. There is a more subtle, more personal, more subjective aspect of what sustainable wine means for each one of us. But what is the correct definition of good wine? There is a lot of poetry around sensory analysis, but today we will emphasize the concept that sensory analysis is a scientific discipline that allows an objective evaluation of wines through the senses. It is our duty as wine stakeholders to equip and inform consumers on these objective evaluations so that they can use them in their personal judgment on individual wine products. Through this, we ensure that the long-term sustainability of wine and its role in the social and cultural aspects of our lives is preserved. This is probably the first global meeting considering the sensory quality of wines as necessary dimension of the long-term sustainability of wine. Taste and its expression through the techniques of sensory analysis is one very important indicator for sustainability. This dimension has always been considered implicit due to the general perception that any new product needs to be better than the previous in all aspects. However, it is time that we make this an explicit pledge for sustainable wines that have certified sensory qualities. The need to include sensory factors in short-term and long-term evaluation of sustainability has not only trade relevance, one related to the correct information to consumers, but also significant cultural relevance. In other words, we want to make a statement and to show the relevance of aroma and taste quality in creating sustainable wine, and we want to understand how this can be scientifically measured. We need to develop the skill to communicate this aspect of sustainable wine in marketing individual wines and the overall sustainability debate. Experts from all over the world are here to contribute in defining a way to measure and integrate the social and cultural quality and importance of wine in the scientific evaluation of sustainability, with particular focus on sensory analysis. With the help of all the present stakeholders, we'll try to discuss and identify the sensory profiles linked to different ethnicities, cultures, in order to draw profiles of consumers worldwide. We will attempt to identify the sensory factors that can mean the difference between failure and success in a particular region, and also the common language to communicate these factors to the final consumers. Moreover, we'll try to explore the new frontiers of neuromarketing in wine products and the measurement of emotional reactions. In conclusion, we hope to lay the foundation for a joint understanding of sensory analysis, a scientific discipline that can be a key to success for our companies in communicating sustainability. Thank you very much.
Hi, Anita.
Good morning. I'm Anita Oberholster, Chairperson of the Steering Committee for the second day of the Simei International Conference, titled Discover the Sensory Factors, Measuring the Quality and Social and Cultural Importance of Wine with a particular focus on sensory analysis. Today we'll focus specifically on the importance of sensory analysis in the quest for sustainability. Yesterday centered mostly on the environmental and economic impact of sustainability. Today the emphasis is specifically on the important role of sensory science in ensuring a quality product, taking into account the social and cultural environment of the aimed consumer. This conference aims to answer several questions regarding the importance of sensory analysis in sustainability and how it can be used optimally. Firstly, we will determine the current technical state of sensory and what is available in our toolbox, so to speak. Then, how these tools can be used by both the producer and the retailer to ensure a sustainable product. This means identifying the sensory tools that will help you obtain sustainability. We recognize that even in the global society of today, there specifically in the field of sensory science a very real regional and social cultural influence. It's important to develop a sensory toolbox for your own unique environment. What are the important sensory characteristics in your region? What is the correct language to communicate these important sensory factors? So it's about more than just using the correct sensory tools, but using the right language to communicate the sensory aspects for that region. And how to translate this into a more universal language that can be understood by a wider market than just the regional. Basically, using sensory science to ensure as much as possible both regional and global sustainability. In a nutshell, we aim to address all aspects of sustainability in the grape and wine industry, from the environment to the producer and retailer to the consumer. We want to highlight the integral role of sensory science to ensure quality in all facets of sustainability. May today empower each person to develop a sensory toolbox that's relevant to their own unique environment, and thus take the first steps to obtain a sustainable and quality product. Thank you very much.
Person when I studied in Davis was that we work with sensory science on the same level consumers is perceiving wine. It's the level where our senses, vision, smell, and taste actually look at the wines and come to a decision if you like the wine, if you think it is very interesting. Maurice Lambrecht yesterday said that the wine industry worldwide is changing from a production-driven wine industry to a consumer-driven one. And I'm very happy that we have a couple of really good experts which will tell you a little bit more regarding wine, but also regarding coffee, what sensory techniques they are applying to better understand the quest and the desires of the consumers. At the same time, and that's my experience, is it's very important to translate what's important for us as winemakers, the geographic heritage of our wine, the impact of terroir, the impact of different varieties, but also the impact of different viticultural and enological techniques we are using traditionally or new, that we can translate this into the language of consumers, and that's what sensory analysis provides, so they can look at a profile and say, oh, this is very interesting, this will match the food I'm cooking today, so I will buy this wine because it is really something for me. One thing yesterday in our discussion we also figured out is that somebody said, well, it would be important that sensory also shows that the measures we're taking in the vineyards, in the winery, has not a negative impact on the wine quality, on the sensory properties. I would go even further. Wouldn't it be great if we could really show that sustainability in our working has a positive impact, is changing in a positive way? When we more precisely apply water but less water, it maybe stimulate a more production of pigments or of other aroma compounds, which makes the wine better. So finally, it would be great if consumers are choosing wines from sustainable production, not only because it is labeled and certified, but because they perceive the wine as better, as more appealing, as just more interesting. That would be a great validation of all our work on the levels consumers perceiving wine on the sensory levels. So it's my duty to show you a little bit about the sensory toolbox we are really using. At the end, I want to conclude then where do we really help with sensory science to improve our sustainability in our production. We talked about wines tells us where you're coming from, where the wine is coming from. So I wanted to tell you very briefly where I'm coming from. That's the building where I'm working, And maybe important, we start next year an MBA program which has the name Wine Sustainability and Sales. So it will really focus on the topic we're having yesterday and today here. We also do a dual program in viticulture enology, and that's where we're working, especially here. Look at the sensory room. We're doing most of our research, but also aroma chemistry or small-scale winemaking. Being in Milano, I wanted to have a quote of somebody who's coming from here, and that's Leonardo da Vinci, who once said, "All comprehension starts with the senses." So without using our senses, not only for winemaking, but also for science, for, of course, art and other things, we need our senses to better understand, to better comprehend the things. And I thought it's really nice. And what's very important, Natasha asked me, so in the future, will it be a machine who's doing the job of sensory? And I said, no. How could a scientist know so much about the future? The fascinating thing about the senses is they're connected, they're the holistic, and they are integrating. So they're integrating different things together and then come up to a conclusion, said, so this is a Pinot Noir made from a Dijon Clone 7.7 and is being fermented in an American oak barrel. That's nothing what a machine can do. It could put up different small bits and pieces, but not integrated together, and that's a very big strength of our sensory techniques. So I want to go to a few of these techniques, and I wanted to start with the most easy one, difference test. It gives us a robust answer to precise questions. And I will go to the other things when I'm at the time when I want to present them. So it's just a difference test. You have two different wines, and you give a clear question, which wine is darker, which wine has an off flavor. Just example for sustainability, we are breeding to have varieties which have a higher resistancy just by their biology. And some of these things have an off flavor. It's maybe too green, too herbaceous, or it has an off flavor like artificial strawberries. So that's something what we can do with this technique to see very early on if the breeding is on the right way. Another thing is where we don't know the answer from before. For example, it's also related to sustainability, is if we are using oak barrels or we are using oak chips. Why is that important for sustainability? From the same amount of oak, and oak is a limited resource nowadays, the good oak we're using for the treatment of wine. When we use the same amount of oak and we make them to chips, we can treat 100, 200 times more wine. We can use this resource more efficiently than when we do barrels. So if the result is like this, that people cannot recognize the wine which has been fermented or aged in the oak barrel, this would be a result. We can tell the management or the winemaker, yes, you can go along with the oak chips. We cannot perceive a sensory difference. If we are, however, recognize the oak barrel as something distinct, we have to go to the next level. We have to ask, why is this difference present? On what sensory traits does it rely? So then we're coming to the next tool, which is descriptive analysis. It tells us not that the wine are different. It tells us how do they differ, why are they perceived good, or maybe also bad. And I'll make you an example. But first of all, I wanted to show you what's very important. And when President Zonin said in the beginning, many people perceive sensory as poetry or as something very subjective, I have to say what we have to do in order to have sensory as a scientific discipline, we have to divide perception and evaluation. So when we do perception alone, we train our judges with standards. We calibrate them, and when they recognize apple, it's a smell of a specific apple, not of Granny Smith, not of Golden Delicious, but it is Pinot Noir or something like this. So we train them, and then we not ask, how do you like the wine? We ask at this level, how intense is the flavor of citrus, of honey, of oak? So we are using trained judges. We're using calibration, like in normal analytical techniques, and we use, of course, statistical analysis to see this is a true signal, significant, and this is just noise, what we are perceiving. But the differentiation between objective description and subjective quality assessment, which will be done with consumers or wine experts, that's very important. So that's the workplace of a sensory judge. You see here we have the standards, like citrus, like pear, like honey. And here we have actually some quartzite stones. They have been wetted with water and some wine, and this was our standard for minerality. So people were trained on this perception of minerality. And we prepared these standards in the morning. The PhD students is doing this, and we're using apples, we're using honey, we're using some other stuff to make, for example, artificial fruit with these Gummibärchen. So an example, we started to plant in 2003, 2004 a lot of Sauvignon Blancs, and we knew from our colleagues that it is not this easy to make a typical Sauvignon Blanc smelling like passion fruit, smelling like grapefruit, smelling like elder blossoms. So we did an experiment where we used a normal production, then we do some oxidation in the juice stage, or we prevented any oxidation by using ascorbic acid. And here we see the control, 100%, and we see that indeed when we do juice oxidation, we had less of the passion fruit, we had less intensity of the elder blossom, we had less honey. When we applied this technique, however, look what happened. The wine really exploded in the direction we wanted to have it. More grapefruit, more gooseberry, passion fruit, elder blossom, everything what's really defining a Sauvignon Blanc. And that's something I presented in front of 1,000 winemakers. And they immediately understood why this treatment is important. I could have showed them some chemistry. They said, well, I don't interested in this. But that's something, that's a language they understood. And just to finish it then, we did also a little bit where is this wine now in a competitor analysis. So we had our wine just do it by normal winemaking techniques. And then we had as a comparison one from South Africa, which had a lot of grapefruit, gooseberries, and nice green bell pepper, and another one from New Zealand. And of course, this green wine has nothing to do with these two wines, so is there a need for Sauvignon Blanc? And then we did our reductive treatment, and indeed, now the blue wine is in the middle of the two international competitors, and this was very convincing for the winemakers to go this way, and indeed now Sauvignon Blanc is an important variety in Germany and well paid. Another example, we talked about the geographical heritage, and there are still some people who question this. Questioning is okay, but we did actually 5 years of research about it, and we looked at different vineyards. For example, these two vineyards, which are just 2 kilometers apart. And as you can see here, they have very different soil types. One is a volcanic soil with some loamy character, and the other one is more of a pebble stone and a sandy soil. And when we do the descriptive analysis, indeed, we could show that these two different soils have a huge impact on the perception. Look, the one coming from this soil with the basalt, with the volcanic, was much more peach, much more passion fruit, cantaloupe. The other one was more sour, more lean. It was more driven maybe by minerality. And we did this comparison over 5 vintages for 25 different sites, from the Mosel to the Nahe, to the Pfalz, to Rheinhessen. And we could really show with statistical techniques that the wines really differ, and we treated all the grapes we harvested from the different sites exactly the same, so winemaking was not an impact. This was from 1 year with a long vegetation period. What happens in a year with a short vegetation period? And that's about climate change. This was a typical year we see more often. You see the difference go in the same direction, but it is less. It's not as pronounced as it was in the other year. And the reason was we had a warm summer, and then we had rainfall in the middle of September, and you see how the berries were cracking because they were taking up the water and they were cracking, and Riesling, some of you may know, had a very thin skin, so it's reacting very sensitively to this situation. We had to pick them too early, and we could not develop the sensory differences we saw in the vintage before. So climate change is a little bit of a threat. And just to show you how climate change is changing, this is always the time along this line when we reached a minimal maturity, 60-degree bricks. It's just okay for making maybe a sparkling base wine, maybe not enough. But the point is, you see it's getting earlier and earlier. And when we look within just 3 decades, we have a 4 weeks earlier harvest. We reached it, so we call this harvest compression, and that's actually for sustainable viticulture, it's a big challenge to cope with this. Finally, it's important to communicate this to the consumers to have the transparency. So we made a little bit of a list of different descriptors which are typical to the different bedrock types we have for Riesling in Germany, and this helps to use this language properly. When we taste wine, and I would say we could now start to serve, Linda, we can start to serve the wine because we do a little bit experiment. Instead of making a snapshot with the descriptive analyses, we could do a video. We could look how the taste is actually changing on our palate when we go on and go on. And you will get now a wine served, and you will taste it when I tell you when you should taste it, and then you should look how this wine actually lingers. We have developed techniques for this. This was during my time in Davis, and Enrique Bartra is perceiving here the wine with a small Macintosh, moving his finger and on the cursor with the mouse. And so we see over the timeline, the wines produce a different curve on bitterness. Time intensity looks only at one attribute at the same time. So what we learn here is when the wines are getting more alcohol, from 1 to 8 to 14%, the bitterness is actually increasing, and maybe most important, the lingering character of bitterness is also getting longer and longer. So wines with a higher alcohol, and this is true for many times when we have climate change, more sugar, more alcohol, they tend to get more bitter. Now, let's have an evaluation of one wine. This is a Greek wine on bitterness, and you see it's a pretty bitter wine. And then we used a different technique. I will introduce you very briefly. And you see, indeed, here we not only look at bitterness, we look at sweetness, sourness, and then very important, the bitter aftertaste. Bitter is indeed very dominating. And there is a second wine, a Riesling from Germany. Well, it's not as bitter, but it's also pretty bitter. But when we look at this wine with a different technique, we are wrong. This wine is not bitter. This wine is sour, which is okay for a Riesling, but how does this misleading curve appear? That's what we call halo effect. When we have only the possibility to rate one attribute, in this case bitter, whatever we perceive, we rate as bitter. But with the new technique, we are asking not only for bitterness, we ask for sourness, sweetness, astringent, bitter, and alcoholic, and then the people have the choice, and they rate precisely what they really perceive, which is sourness. And that's the reason why why the sensory community developed this temporal dominance of sensation. This works now in a way that we have different attributes, vegetative, lactic, fruity, alcoholic, and with a mouse, we are clicking at the time which of the attribute is when we start tasting it. We describe, oh, this is at the moment fruity. Oh, it's changing to sour now. Well, now it's more sweet, 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 sweet. Oh, now it's bitter, bitter. So that's how we change on the screen how we perceive it. And at the end, we come up with these curves, which are not intensity, but here, 45% of the people agreed that sweetness is a dominating one, and here it's bitterness which is dominating. We do some stats. That is a chance level. This is significant, and we see sweet, then fruity, then bitter is actually what is significant. So you will have now one wine in your glass, which is the wine on the left side here, the Mandoliaia, which has been provided by La Vis and by Luciano Rappos. Thank you very much. And the other wine you don't get that we have, but we tasted in our laboratory. It's a Gewürztraminer from Alto Adige. And you see from the profile that the wines are very distinct. The sweet wine you have in your glass is more driven by peach, honey, by sweetness, body, persistence, and it's darker. The other Gewürztraminer is more citrus, passion fruit, floral, and of course also more bitter. Good. Now, it is up to you to taste now the wine. And please, it would be, by the way, great if the talker gets also a bottle. No, I can have. No, but please take the wine in your mouth and then maybe close your eyes and then see how the wine is changing, how the perception is changing. Thank you very much. See what is first, what comes then, and just look also how long the whole thing is lingering. If it is 10 seconds, if it is maybe 20 seconds, just have an impression of it. So what I wanted to show you or convince you that it is not really one taste which is dominating all the time. It's maybe some fruity attack in the beginning, then it's getting more sweet, but then there's certainly some alcoholic or some bitterness coming up, and people differ a little bit on this. And I show you now the results we did with our technique, with the temporal dominance of sensation. You see we had indeed here with our panel a sweet attack which lasted for at least 10 seconds. Sourness was never really getting dominating. The same is with bitterness. Only at the end, after 40 to 50 seconds, there was a certain perception of bitterness. There was some fruitiness in between. And the most dominating one was indeed the honey character here, going up and being dominant for the 20, 30, 40 seconds. So it was a sweet, honey, fruity aftertaste, and it is amazing how long this wine really lasted. I don't know if you can, but you see, you get much more information than just looking at the profile. When we look at the different wine, that's a significant level. When we look at the Gewürztraminer, you cannot taste at the moment. We see a very different picture. There is some sourness attack at the beginning, and then the overall dominating feature is the bitterness. And bitterness is one thing which is pretty clear among consumers. It's a taste which is not appreciated. So bitterness is a negative impact. Fruitiness is not really taking up. There's some alcoholic perception. Floral and honey is not really getting much above chance and significance level. So the question is now, how do we get rid of the bitterness, which is that a little bit of disturbing. So I will show you now a little bit what you can do in enology to change the bitterness. And this is, for example, how we clear the juice before we ferment it. And those who are involved in winemaking, NTU is a measurement how clear it is. So 10 NTU means it's very clear. It's like a clarified apple juice. And you see this wine is sweet and a little bit sour, but the bitterness is below sourness. If we don't clarify the juice before we ferment it, not as much, you see the sweetness is changing, it's going down, and the perceived bitterness is increasing. And when we do higher NTUs, the bitterness is even further increasing. So one thing we could recommend is please do a good clarification of the juice before you ferment it. Another example is about dealcoholization. I stressed this yesterday a little bit. And when we compare here a Pinot Noir, which has been dealcoholized from 14% to 12%, we see already that indeed the alcoholic perception is going down and a little bit the bitterness and the stringency. When we go further down to 10 and 8%, we recognize that the wine is not perceived as a red wine anymore with 10 or 8% alcohol anymore. It's changing its cultural identity. but from a technical point of view, very interesting that all the flavor compounds are not changing very much, so the technique is pretty good in this regard. So these are statistically significant difference. When we look now at our time course, we see it's fruity, and then with 14%, it's perceived alcoholic, hot, and this is not really appealing for a red wine. When we reduce by 2% the alcohol, it totally changes. It is slightly sweet, then sour, and then the dominating taste is fruitiness, and that's what we really like. So you see here that when we change the alcohol content by a technology, we can really improve the sensory. Assessing quality, approach of wine expert and consumers. I showed you science where we just do assessment objectively because we don't do a quality assessment. Now we do a quality assessment by consumers or experts. Consumers is important. Their choice is important for the success on the market, and we want to know what are the sensory traits which are triggering their preference. We call this drivers of preference or drivers of liking. And how do we do this? We do two different tests. One is a preference test with target consumers, and my colleagues will talk more about this. And then we do also descriptive analysis, as I showed you. And then we can do the objective description, link it with the preference, and learn about it. Learn what flavors are really preferred. And I make an example of red wines we tasted 10 years ago, Beaujolais red wines from France and German Dornfelder red wines. And we learned that the preference is in this direction, and the French Beaujolais wines are in the opposite direction, so they had a problem. But also the German Dornfelder, which is a very dark variety, is not really matching the preference. So it's important for us to learn where do we have something to do. I think Jennifer Jo Wiseman will talk on this more from the perspective of a great wine producer. But we learn also here from our sensory what are the factors who are really driving the preference. And it is color, it's fruity taste, it's sour cherry, it's sweetness and body. It is definitely not sourness. It's definitely not astringency, which is perceived like rough sandpaper. And here we see each point is one consumer. And we tasted Beaujolais wines, we tasted in Germany Dornfelder wines, and see the majority went to the German Dornfelder wines, and some people also liked the Beaujolais wines. So that's what the German consumer thought, and this is how the French consumers thought about it. And it was a little bit disturbing for the French that especially when they tasted on blind, not knowing where the wine is coming from, that it was kind of half of them liked the German style and half liked the Beaujolais style. How about experts? And here we are about poetry. People are very different. And I just showed you 3 wines. Chardonnay from California, one from Sonoma, which is more better area, making more pronounced wine, as Karen will support, yes, and French Burgundy. And these are 3 professionals which tasted the wines on a scale from 0 to 10. So these 2 liked it. The California, the female professional didn't like it too much. It was kind of mediocre. Then there was the next wine. There was a difference as well, and among the French Burgundy, the first person didn't like it at all, and this person really loved it. What do I learn? If I refer to this person, she will recommend as a totally different wine than this person. And I always say to consumers, how do you know that Robert Parker, that Michel Bonton, that all the people know how your personal taste is like? Please stick to your own taste, be confident, and stick to your own impression. So how do we get around this problem? Because when we do a means, the mean of these 3 tasted, there's no difference really. So means sometimes don't say anything. So how we cope with this, and this is a picture of an international wine competition. Some of us are tasting, like Luciana is tasting here every year, and it is 200 tasters are tasting, and 6 to 7 people are tasting it. This is according to the OIV, who has made some very important rules which we are following. And so here, first step is we not asked 1 expert, we asked 5, 6, 7 experts. More would be better, but also more expensive. And they're coming from very different countries. But what we also do at Mundus Vini, we not only evaluate the quality and give the medals, we also do a descriptive part. So first we do the description of the wines without looking for quality, and then we do the quality assessment. What do I mean with descriptive part? People get a list of different odor attributes, taste and overall impression, like harmonious, like body, like potential, and they describe how intense they perceive these attributes. And what do we do with this information? We build up things like this sensory profiles. This is, for example, an outstanding champagne which got a Grand Gold medal, but that's the quality. Now the consumers would like to know, why is this getting a gold medal, and does it fit to my quest for a wine which is maybe more of a traditional champagne with a lot of nuts and brioche and spicy and not so front-forward fruity. And these profiles are provided in a database so people can look not only for the quality, the medal, but also for the sensory profile. Then we do the description by quality, by a list which is provided by the OIV, and at the end, if the points are high enough, it gets a gold medal. And another example here, Amarone della Valpolicella, which really did also very well and have a very different profile. So that's also about transparency, where we talked about ethics of sustainability, that consumers would like to know why things are happening, and this is getting them actually a great deal of transparency that they can follow. I'm at my end. I would like to conclude my talk. Sensory evaluation serves sustainability as it helps. First of all, to characterize and market regional terroir-driven wines. When we showed around the world, from Seattle to Australia to South Africa, our terroir results, journalists wrote, the German researchers showed, terroir indeed matters. So it was convincing for the winemakers to go in this direction and produce these very regional wines, which is part of sustainability. To improve wine styles by using superior, almost sustainable viticulture and enological techniques. I said in the beginning, it would be great if we could prove by sensory techniques that sustainable viticulture has indeed an impact on sensory, and hopefully a positive one. To understand wine perception and quality perception in a more comprehensible way, and looking at temporal changes. Maybe the wine from the profile is great, but then we have this lingering bitterness which really puts down the consumer, and the wine is doing well on the profile, but it is not approved by the consumers because of the bitterness. That's what we learned from the temporal techniques. To produce successful wines by identifying the needs of consumers and implement the drivers of preference in our winemaking process. To provide not only medals and high points to show the excellence of a wine, but also to assist customers in their buying decision by providing an objective sensory profile, as I showed you from the Mundus Vini. And finally, very important, we talk about sustainability, social impact. We foster by using people like secretaries, like forklift drivers, like people who are not winemakers, who are not opinionated about their own work, but more objective people. In the sensory description of the wines of the company, we involve the staff more in serving as a sensory panel, and so they have a different identification with the company, with the product. They are more proud of what's going on, and that's also an important part. That's what I wanted to show you. I hope it was not too much. It was a journey through the different toolbox with some application, and thank you very much for listening.
Lovely. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you over these 2 days, and certainly to be able to speak with such a great crowd. Yesterday, as we were participating, I learned a lot about the challenges that we're all facing. We're really all facing as an industry, to be able to not only understand how to capitalize on the great work that's going on in sustainability, but how to be able to advance that cause to really benefit the entire industry as a whole. So what I'd like to attempt to do now is relate that back to some of the work that we're doing at Gallo. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're using sensory science as a tool and using it throughout the entire aspect of our business. And hopefully, through that exploration, you'll be able to take a little bit home and be able to relate some of this to your own worlds and to some of your own business. A little bit about the Gallo Winery. So obviously we're from California, and our founders were extremely passionate about the environment, about quality, and particularly about innovation. So it is very, very strong in our culture today as a winery. And so because of that deep cultural roots that we have within innovation, we're always striving to be more about the continuous improvement of not only the way that we grow, the grapes that we grow, but also being able to impact the entire industry. So in order to really think about all of what we do, from the vineyard all the way to the marketplace, we do need a bridge. We really do. We do need a bridge to be able to understand what are the kinds of things that are happening in our vineyards and how are we impacting what's actually happening in the bottle. Because as the founders also believed very strongly, the consumers are paramount. They're paramount to our industry, they're paramount to our products, and we want to be able to please them in a variety of ways. And so as we think about that and explore that particular aspect of our work that we do, we know from other industries that sensory experiences do drive decisions. It's not just in the wine industry. It's in every industry. You know, I'm in the wine industry now. I haven't been in the wine industry my whole career. I've spent 30 years in other places, in other industries, and it's very similar. It's all the same. Sensory characteristics and sensory experiences. We see it in all walks of life. Think about when you're walking into a mall and you're bombarded. And I say mall, you know, so obviously that's a U.S. trait, but a store or any of the shopping environments. You're bombarded with those sensory experiences, and they do affect how you make decisions. So truly being able to understand them is very important for us to, as producers, to be able to create the right types of products for us as we go forward. So we're very passionate about this particular aspect of our business, and thus the Gallo Winery actually did quite a bit of investment 10 to 15 years ago on really being able to capitalize on understanding sensory characteristics, understanding the products, and not only that, understanding the emotional aspect and consumers' perceptions all the way through the supply chain when they purchase a product. So what I wanted to explore with you all this morning for just a few minutes is really this value chain. So thinking about building that bridge from the kinds of things that we're doing in the vineyards and the kinds of measurements that we can create. There were great examples. I'm so glad that I was able to follow because there are great examples that were given already and on some of the kinds of experimentation that we can do. So my belief and what we believe at Gallo is that being able to link all of these aspects along this value chain is extremely important, and sensory science is a way we can do that. It's a language that actually transcends the entire aspect of this value chain. So I want to give you a few examples. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of it in a few minutes, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the things that we do. So within the viticulture environment, we have a very rich history of research. So grape and wine history. So we have probably a portfolio of about 40 to 50 kinds of experimentations that are going on in any one particular time. We use sensory characteristics of the berry. So thinking about some of the yield kinds of things that we know that people are dealing with across the world, or water kinds of characteristics. Those things have, those environmental characteristics have an effect on the berry. and the berry, and so we do berry sensory within the vineyards. We also do picking decisions within the vineyards from the berry, and the winemakers are trained on all of the sensory characteristics. Training is extremely important. And it's not about right or wrong. It's about what you're perceiving and the intensity of what you're perceiving. And it's extremely liberating for people to be able to agree on a common characteristic and then be able to rate that in an intensity way. So we actually have people in the fields that are evaluating the berry characteristics, knowing when to pick, knowing when to have a particular profile, and then knowing what program to stream that to. We do make a lot of wine. As you all know, we make a lot of wine. And so those decisions are extremely important to us from an efficiency perspective and also from knowing what we're going to get in the final glass, as well as wine sensory with all of those experiments too. So understanding what viticulture treatments are actually doing relating to what characteristics of the wine that are going to happen. Now thinking about as we move into how do these characteristics relate into the wine, I'm going to talk quite a bit about the consumer and the different kinds of attributes that are important to the consumer in particular places. So as we're developing wine, as we're thinking about the blends, as we're thinking about the way that the wine is being made, wine style guidance is extremely important. So we've heard a little bit about some preference mapping. I'll talk a little bit about that. Being able to really say, what are the important characteristics for us to drive in this particular wine? What do we want high? What do we want to minimize? And that all happens within that portion of our business. Moving on, we always are very concerned about the quality and the consistency of our wine over time, and also within different transportation characteristics. That's also a way that we can use sensory science. And then I want to talk a bit about point of sale and also the emotion and occasions. We do a lot of work within my group on how a shopper is choosing wine at retail, so that we can understand what are the particular characteristics they're attuning to, what are the things that are important to them. I was thinking yesterday as we were talking about some of the sustainability kinds of challenges that we have, how some of the different kinds of certifications and stamps and different kinds of signals could actually be used in combination with different characteristics at point of sale. There's some consumers that do attune to that and some that don't. But being able to think about that from a holistic perspective, in addition to the characteristics of the wine, is always a fantastic thing for us to do as a community, not just one producer, but as a community. And of course, communicating wine style is an extremely difficult thing to do in store. We have many different techniques that we've used, some wonderful things that we've done in store that work very well. They're difficult to implement. This is challenging stuff. It's not an easy industry, and consumers we know are overwhelmed. You know, I hear it every day from consumers. They're overwhelmed. They don't know how to choose. They really want to know what the wine tastes like, but they are not able to make that choice necessarily in retail. So as producers, I feel extremely passionate that we need to be able eventually to create some sort of system and signal for them to know that this is the wine that I like, because we know that everybody likes different kinds of wines. So we feel very passionate about that, haven't solved it, but feel very passionate about that type of research. So let me go a little bit deeper into this middle area, because I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about, and there was some discussion yesterday, certainly on understanding more about the consumer. So we consider this foundation learning all the way from beginning to end. And so when we're thinking about that comprehensive integrated learning, we really do believe that the consumers and the customers do provide a foundation for that. Everything is cross-functional for us. There is no, the question was interesting, the last question was interesting. There is no one person that owns this. In any of our industries, I believe very firmly in that. We need to have a shared language, obviously, and we need to have continuous training. Extremely important for all of our businesses, but it is shared. This is our product. It's all of our product. And then comprehensive in scope. So we do go all the way from the vineyard into consumption. I think that's extremely important. And so relating those different measures at different points in time are important as well. Let's talk a little bit about that cycle. Let me see if I can, whoops. Okay, so the words aren't coming up. But well, I'll point at the squares and I'll tell you the words. Okay, so this, and I'm just gonna go back to this right here. Okay, so this is the background cycle. And the background of this is we need to understand what the consumers say and want. We need to understand regional and environmental and gatekeeper kinds of things that they want, the important attributes. And we need to design our wines to be able to match those different characteristics. The middle circle is really about monitoring. So monitoring is extremely important for us, and being able to change some of those different sustainability factors, whether or not it's to reduce cost and transportation or something, we always need to be able to monitor how that's happening within our wine. And then, of course, we have consumer feedback. Gallo has consumer feedback on a daily basis that's coming into the winery that we capitalize on. So let me go a little bit deeper to the consumer research, the important attributes of that. And I just want to quickly run through. We do a lot of consumer research, a lot, and I don't think that it's not necessarily, when I say a lot, it's not necessarily things that other companies can't do. One of the things that we are very specific about is we're continuous in our learning. So we're very planned in the way we do things. We learn about consumers on a very regular cycle, as you can see here, and we do it on a global basis. We also look at all different kinds of consumers. So we do not rely, because we have a portfolio that is across many, many different price points, so we need to really understand consumers all over the world and at different price points. We have a very highly, we rely a lot on descriptive analysis, so you already heard the description of that. Very highly trained people. They are outside the company. We actually have professional people that we hire. Doesn't mean that everybody has to do that. The key is, it's a shared language. So this happens to be our lexicon. We had a different lexicon last night. This happens to be our lexicon. Available to everybody, by the way. There's nothing magic in the words. It really is about the training. It's about consistency. And it's about people being able to be monitored and measured. And it's an analytical tool. So that's the key for us. So this was already described. So this is my little stickman figure saying, here's the consumers. Group them together. If somebody is in the same group, they like the same thing. Understand what they like based on the descriptive attributes, and then you're able to say how many consumer groups you have and what they like. So very easy way, obviously, technically, some statistical and mathematical kinds of things that have to go on in the background. But the beauty of this is for us as producers, we understand on a global basis that, let's just take red wine. 5 groups of red wine. Consumers, they're driven by very different sensory attributes, and we can target those people then to be able to produce the wines that we want. We found it over and over again. You saw some numbers from 2002, 2001 was when we started this type of program. Over and over again, we find those same groups of people. Now, that's at a very high level, but it's really useful, because for us, then we can say, if we add that to the gatekeeper important attributes, so same kind of thing, so we have regional differences. So thinking about all your different regions and thinking about the sustainability kinds of aspects of those regions, this is not a difficult exercise. Really a sensory exercise really to understand what are the common attributes for that particular region. So it's not difficult to apply. And then those can be the things that you communicate. You could communicate those to the gatekeepers, you could communicate those in different ways. So we really want to understand this, because as we're producing wines from around the world, we want to be able to understand what are the attributes that are extremely important within that region. Add those two pieces of things together, and we're able to develop wine styles. So wine styles are really very important to us because they're the common thread that helps us to make great business decisions based on the sensory characteristics of the wine. So our cross-functional teams develop wine styles, and anybody in this room can do the same thing. What are the important characteristics of this wine that you want to convey, and and how intense are those particular characteristics? For us, we actually have an analytical specification for each one of our wines. It's a great way for us to communicate, because then if we're going to make a change, so say we're going to make a change in transportation, say we're going to make a change in some winemaking technique, we can be very clear about how that change is either going to enhance the way that we want that wine to taste or not. So it really helps us. It's a great tool to be able to help us look at a wine over time. And then monitoring. I mentioned monitoring before. It's very important. We actually drive our research program based on the kinds of sensory challenges and questions that are coming up over the year. So on a yearly basis, we get everybody together and we look at what are the kinds of challenges we've had in that year? What are the kinds of things that we see in our wines? Are we seeing a little bit more green in some particular vineyard regions? What lot is looking like? What do we see in our water data? Or our soil data? What are the kinds of changes that are happening in soil, and how is that relating to the sensory characteristics in some of those wines? All of those questions for us drive very rich research that we can use in our entire value chain. So we feel very good about the cross-functional nature of how we use this particular program to get better. It's really about getting better and continuous improvement. We do have a lot of different communication vehicles. This is really helpful. So, you know, if this could be helpful for other people, that would be great. Here's a sensory profile of a particular wine. Those are the important characteristics. You don't need to show it all. You just show a few of those important characteristics and some chemistry attributes. So we look at these things over time. People change some of the treatments, perhaps, in the cellar that need to happen, or things that need to happen as we measure wines. So it's a good communication vehicle. This is an extremely important aspect of having a holistic program. The communication is important. The training is important. The alignment of your vocabulary is very important. And consumer feedback. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Now, this may be something a little bit different than other companies have, but we are very fortunate to have a consumer information center that has hundreds of thousands of consumers that are contacting us on a regular basis, and we use that information a lot. We use it, and of course we have a large number of brands, over 100 brands, so a lot of that information is coming in on different brands or different varieties, but we're able to then question the consumers, salespeople, gatekeepers on the kinds of things they're experiencing with the wine, as they call it. So it could be from a social media channel, it could be from email, it could be from a letter, it could be from the phone. And so all of those different kinds of aspects help us to be able to garnish more feedback from consumers about our existing products. And then we also learn a little bit about what might be something new that we want to create in the future. So let's go back to our picture now. Because I hope that I've been able to highlight the ways that the Gala Winery uses sensory science throughout the entire supply chain. We feel very strongly about research. We feel very strongly about grape and wine research that enable us to really create different styles of wine that we feel are very important for our consumers. We feel just as passionate about being able to consistently, over time, with very high quality, create the kinds of wines that have the wine styles that we know our consumers are going to love. And then, of course, we feel very important. We feel that those consumers are really, they really are the holy grail for us. They really are the people that we want to be able to please. Now, not every portion of the portfolio is going to be targeting a specific consumer group, but every portion of the portfolio needs to have a specific target of wine that we're actually trying to achieve. And that target of wine then enables us to really think about what are the kinds of business decisions that we would like to be able to make, and then we can make them with real information. This is a science for us. It's a way of life, and it's very important that we're able to use these types of techniques sensory as well as chemistry, because chemistry is an extremely important analytical technique for us. Well, using them together, we're able to make better business decisions that really help us to move our business in the right direction. And I think listening to some of the challenges from a sustainability perspective, it's a great tool for people to be able to employ thinking about those kinds of changes that people want to make in their business. So thank you.
All the appropriate things going on here. Are we on? Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is truly a pleasure to be here. And I'm sure many of you out there are saying, why in the world would we have somebody from coffee coming to the wine conference? And in all honesty, when I got the call, I asked myself the same question. And I even said to the organizers, you do know I don't work for the wine industry. Oh, yes, we know. So as I started thinking about it, and as I started thinking about agricultural products, and I started thinking about varietal differences and variations that happen in the wine industry, you can completely substitute wine for everything I'm saying about coffee, because we have exactly the same issues that you have. Instead of calling it berries, we call them wine cherries. Instead of talking about regions kind of in the lowlands, we talk about regions that circle the equator with the various different countries that actually produce our coffees. And when we talk a little bit about sustainability, I must say Starbucks is probably one of the largest coffee companies that take this to heart. So what I want to first start out with is to talk a little bit about the Starbucks mission and values. And the reason why this is so important is because the company believes in the 3 pillars of sustainability and demonstrates that on a daily basis. We have a few main words here that I wanted to highlight. Our mission to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. And if anybody has heard our CEO, Howard Schultz, talk, he's a very passionate person and talks a lot about the fact that our responsibility to society is to create an experience that we can all enjoy. But then in order to do that, we need to do it responsibly. We need to do it ethically. And we talk a little bit in terms of challenging the status quo. There's certainly many opportunities to cause some degradation to our earth. And we want to make sure that for the next generation, they can enjoy exactly the same things that we're enjoying here as well. Starbucks supports the coffee growing industry. We purchased our first coffee plantation, believe it or not. Typically, we work with growers. In the regions where we actually work, we support education, opening schools for children in order to support the working environment to make sure that we're giving back to those communities. Being present, connecting with transparency, dignity, and respect. Again, when we talk about sustainability, that sociological part of it is very important to us. But as you can also see, we're performance-driven. So we've got that economic thing going on as well. Just like your organizations, we're in it to make some profit. But at the end of the day, the term that we use through the lens of humanity helps to ground us in terms of what we're doing and why we're actually doing it. So I'm very grateful to the speakers who came before me, because they're making my life really easy. The kinds of things that we do are very similar to what happens in the wine industry. We're going to talk a little bit about training of panelists. We're going to talk about corporate language. We're going to talk about the importance of communicating within the company, which is a big reason for our successes. So we're going to talk about how we went about doing that, developing the corporate language. And as you can imagine, I'm assuming everybody knows Starbucks. Is that right in this room? Okay. I do know we're not very represented in Italy. However, you have wonderful coffee here, and we're learning a lot from you as well. Going through the training process, some of the tools that we use, some of the output from some of those tools, the things that Jennifer Jo talked about, exactly the same things we do with coffee, trying to segment consumers, trying to understand what floats their boat and what makes them choose what they want to choose. The whole idea around the consumer's subjectivity versus the objectivity of description. We know consumers are very good to tell us, I like it, I don't like it, but it's very difficult for them to communicate to us why they like it and they don't like it. So at the end of the day, for our coffee roasters, which would equate to our winemakers, communicating those likes and dislikes so that we can actually develop coffees that are acceptable to them. Let's see. So the question is always, is the sensory function something nice to have, or is it really important to a particular business? And I must say, I've been at Starbucks for about 4 years, and when I came, it was probably that, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, yeah, go play over there in the corner somewhere. But when we actually looked at the value it could bring in terms of expanding our portfolio of coffee, which would be very similar to expanding the portfolio of wine, there was a lot of wake-up calls going on. And so what we recognize, the sensory tools, the objective sensory tools is only one part of the whole experience. And again, as other speakers have talked about, we need to make sure that we get the voice of the consumer, because we can talk to ourselves all day long, and as you probably experience in your industry as well, when our expert roasters make a coffee and they're just enamored with it and it's so delicious, and they say, this is going to sell and we're going to be so successful. And at the end of the day, I say to them, are you going to buy every single cup of coffee in this world and support the business? So the recognition that they only get one vote, just like everybody else. And so opening up to find out what that consumer actually is wanting and desiring is huge for our company. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that aha moment and how we were missing probably about 40% of the coffee consuming population, but we've kind of turned that around a little bit. So roles and responsibilities, some people don't like to talk about this, and we always sort of talk a little bit about teamwork. In our organization, it truly came to light, because when I came on board, of course, as you can imagine, our coffee masters would kind of look at me and say, and you're going to tell me how to do my job? And I say to them, no. My job is not to tell you how to do your job. I am going to work with you and partner with you to be able to put some structure and agreement around how we're going to talk about coffee. They truly are the experts. I completely give them that field, and they love talking about coffee. And it's a delight to listen to them talking about coffee, because they open up and you see their eyes fluttering, and they go on and on and on about the experience. And then we say to them, let's capture that experience so that we all in our corporate organization can talk the same language you're talking. So their willingness to share and their willingness to partner, it takes a little bit of time. You need to convince them that this, again, is a collaboration, as opposed to, we're going to tell you how to do your job. And the sensory professionals, obviously we have training in not only quantitative but qualitative analysis and process-oriented. In the Starbucks organization, it's so passionate, nobody likes to hear process. And I say to them, if we don't have something down on paper, it's very difficult to communicate not only within the organization, but outside to our consumers as well. So trust, respect, collaboration amongst the teams results in a successful program. And today, our expert coffee masters come trundling down to the sensory lab. We take out the French presses and we do all the analysis and the tasting together to try to understand what have they actually developed today that's going to rock the coffee world. So it's really been a wonderful journey, and we're obviously looking forward to more to come. So when we talk about a common language, and the wine industry has exactly the same thing as the coffee industry. We've got our key descriptors that have come through combination of the academic world in addition to the industry. That's a shared list. And for the Starbucks organization, what we do is the list is obviously very extensive, and if you're going to be a highly trained descriptive panel, you'd be doing all these attributes for all the coffees. But what we've actually done is we have identified what are those core descriptors for a particular coffee that we have to meet as a benchmark in order to bucket it into a particular category. And in the coffee world, the big buckets are all around the roast intensity. So we have light roast coffees, we have medium roast coffees, we have dark roast coffees. But within those buckets, we have what I call the interesting coffee attributes, the nutties and the chocolaties and the woodies, and some of the lighter roasts, we get some of those cereal grainy notes, things that resonate with consumers and the reason why we actually want to develop those particular coffees. So if we understand internally how to talk about those attributes, obviously the coffee roasters, knowing the origin of the bean, knowing what we call the roast curve, which you guys do fermentation, but it's a combination of time and intensity in terms of how long those beans are roasted that gives us that final end product. So just like in the wine industry, we have our way of training as well. And as you can see, we pick not only external references for our descriptors, but we choose our actual coffees to benchmark against our scale. The importance of scaling gives us the opportunity to look at things like agricultural variability over the year, look at plant-to-plant variation, look at things like influences of different types of time temperature roastings in terms of how does it influence that final end product. So again, this is very much the analytical part of it, but because our coffee masters and our coffee roasters all understand this language and how it's actually scaled, when we give them a number, they know exactly what that number means. And if we say to them, you know, the berry intensity is just a little too high for this particular coffee, they'll tell me, oh, no problem, I know exactly what to do. And they run off to their experimental labs themselves and modify the time temperature and the combination of where the beans come from in order to deliver against that particular expectation. So this is just a quick example of how we actually do some scaling. And just like the wine industry, agricultural variability plays a huge, huge role. We know that we are never going to get exactly the same coffee time and time again because of the changes that happen in weather, the change that happens in some of the farms that we actually can purchase from. Just like in the wine industry, we have agronomists that go out to all the different farms and work on the purchasing and acquisition of beans. They're all just a little bit different. So when we talk about how different is different, we train our panels to be able to tell us is it plus or minus 1 around where the coffee intensity should fall? And so what we've done here is we've anchored, this would be a standard Starbucks light roast coffee, a medium roast coffee, and a dark roast coffee. And the scale is actually developed for coffee, so it's not a universal scale, so we can actually see where those differences lie. So we ask our panelists to say how different is different, and anything that is scaled from a slightly different or less, we say that's within the production agricultural variability, which gives it a big thumbs up. If it's anything within plus or minus 1 around where our target should be, that's also quite good as well. If it falls outside that region, we have a process where it escalates up. The product comes back to the sensory team. We then talk with the coffee masters. We have our own individual tasting at the corporate center to decide whether or not that coffee is actually saleable, acceptable. So it's been a really great program to be able to execute so that we can truly understand and make sure that we get consistency of our coffee time and time again. Something I need to say that I didn't say before. When we talk about the retail space in the Starbucks world, it's truly retail in the store. We have, I think around 28,000 stores worldwide. And so when you talk about consumer feedback, it's instantaneous. And so at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we're delivering against the expectation of the consumer in the experience. And that's also quite important to us. All that feedback comes back to us. We talk a little bit in terms of what can we do better? How can we be more consistent? How do the baristas talk to our customers? So customer language is also quite important in translating the technical words to the consumer acceptable words. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we have had a very aggressive program to spread the training program to all our roasting plants, which has really been a great experience because now at each of our plants, we have anywhere from 30 to 40 trained panelists in the quality group where they gather and they check all the variability from lot to lot, batch to batch, different coffees to each other. And we can actually pull that data and graph that data to see how those changes are happening over the time. So it gives our master roasters an idea in terms of truly what is happening during the growing process, during the time of year, the region, all those pieces of information. As I believe in the wine industry, there's a wealth of what we call tribal knowledge, where our coffee masters know this stuff, it's all in their heads, and if they were ever to walk away, we'd be in big trouble. And so trying to lock down that information and to understand gives us that capability of sustaining the body of information. So the importance of product description in the retail space is that we need to make sure we have consistency and quality of our espresso coffee that goes into all our handcrafteds. If you've been in any of the Starbucks stores, there's a bunch of them. It's all the frappuccinos and the lattes and the macchiatos and the cappuccinos. And the core of that is our espresso beans. And if we don't have consistency there, customers can't get that same experience time and time again. Consistency and quality of reserve coffees. This is kind of an interesting area for Starbucks. We have a group of coffees that we call them reserve because they're very limited, and gives the coffee roasters an opportunity to express themselves. And the coffees come from various different countries and regions, and they roast them and develop them for a very specific taste. So these are for the coffee aficionados, which would be similar to the wine connoisseurs who really love enjoying that experience. So just real briefly, as Jennifer Joa talked about preference mapping, we do that in Starbucks as well, where we take descriptive data, we take consumer data, we cluster them, we have our roasters develop different coffees, we analyze the data to determine where we have those lackings in our portfolio, and we've been able to target some of those consumers that are typically not Starbucks consumers. And lastly, just talking a little bit in terms of corporate language. Again, some of the terminology that we use in the analytical space is probably not so consumer friendly. And so we do things like having focus groups to talk a little bit about terms and how those terms fit. So what we have on our package versus what we talk about, we know how those come together. So in conclusion, the sensory tools and the consumer testing tools are very important in the Starbucks world. The techniques are ones that are used in many, many different industries. And as I mentioned, you could sort of swap out a coffee cherry for a grape berry. And it's exactly the same process and protocol in order to be successful.
May I use this? Is this okay? Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be speaking on behalf of the consortium's experience with retailers and brand manufacturers alike. And actually, if you participated yesterday, I requested to quickly modify my presentation because throughout our discussions, there was so much overlap with the reasons the consortium became into existence and the kind of the key takeaways from yesterday. I don't quite have the time to go through them, but this is just what I had on my notes. And you might notice, if you took notes, similar buzzwords coming up as I go through my presentation. Another request I have is that you consider data. As we're measuring sustainability, you have to have good data. And these are the questions retailers come to us. How do I get data? How do I track it? How do I ensure it's sound quality data? And then at the end of the day, what do I do with it? And this goes to prioritization, which came up yesterday also. So when you're working in sustainability, there's not one single definition, which came up yesterday, and so it's very difficult to prioritize. In our experience with retailers over the last few years, we've really found that there have been 4 buckets of reasons that retailers and brand manufacturers alike are beginning to invest in sustainability. I'd like to draw your attention to the first one, identifying risks and opportunities to gain strategic advantage. I think this is particularly relative to the wine industry because it's about brand reputation. So retailers are concerned about their brands, but so are suppliers. And so you don't want to risk losing your brand reputation. And of course, there's mitigating stakeholder concerns. There's consumer pressure on wanting to increase transparency. And then from a retailer perspective, there's a desire to improve the merchant capabilities as they talk with their suppliers. So those buyer-supplier conversations, which I'm sure many of you are used to and have been a part of if you're a wine producer. And also looking at improving the vendor management. I have these in the deck for you to access later, but there's 2 pieces of news that I think are really relevant for what's happening in the retailer space. And the key takeaways from these news pieces, one are that companies responsible companies are beginning to take ownership of their supply chain and what's happening in their supply chain. And the example in this news piece pulls from Apple and Walmart. And the other one came up yesterday, which is about shareholders and the financial risks of sustainability. So I think that if you take a moment to read those, it'll help frame the overall importance of focusing on sustainability. Now let's get to the benefits from a retailer perspective. First, there is increased sales. So there is a market out there, whether or not the consumers understand what sustainability is. There's pressure from customers to want more sustainable products, whatever that may be. 15 years ago, organic definition was also, what does it mean to be organic? But yet it was a trend, so there was a perception that I want to buy organic. If it's done right, there's also cost operational benefits that can go hand in hand. If it's not done right, it can be expensive. This came up yesterday in the question of, if I invest in sustainable practices, does it pay off in 3 to 5 years? Maybe not. Does it pay off in 10 years? Yes. And you're also branding a sustainable product so you can increase your sales. And it goes back to mitigating risks in your supply chain. So one of our major challenges is that today our supply chains are global. They've been global for centuries. But now they're fast moving and they're complex, especially from the retailer perspectives. Retailers don't just want one product category. I'm selling all sustainable wine. They want to make their product categories in their entire store sustainable. That's a pretty big and complex series of supply chains you're looking at. On top of that, once you've been able to identify the issues in your supply chain, how do you prioritize them? These examples don't all relate to wine, but there are a couple in there that do. And so what I liked about this slide, and this is a slide that we've used for a while, a lot of the words in blue, these are words that were coming up yesterday. Harmonization, consistency, scientific integrity. Today, science does allow us to identify the environmental and social hotspots of supply chains. And so as a result, there's a number of measurement and reporting systems that exist. And because there's a number of measurement and reporting that exist, we have another challenge, survey fatigue. And so that can actually increase the cost as you're trying to be sustainable. You're being asked 5 different questions with the same intent, but different metrics. So there's really been this need to harmonize and create a consistent measurement and reporting system that's holistic. And thus, about 6 years ago, the Sustainability Consortium was created. And our mission takes all those key words that kept coming up in these conversations, and they're coming up because they're so critical to being successful. We're science-based and multi-stakeholder informed. And we take that science to create practical business tools that can be used today. And this enables some innovation in sustainability and ideally to unlock the value in your supply chain. The way that we differ from some of the other reporting systems and that we've learned from them and have aligned where it makes sense is that the consortium works kind of in that space to gather scientific data around sustainability issues throughout the entire value chain that can support corporate reporting. But we're not strictly LCA-based, life cycle analysis-based. We also take science that is peer-reviewed and high-quality literature to support some of these scientific environmental and social issues that have been identified. We also identify improvement opportunities. So where we may work with the retailer or brand manufacturer to look further up their supply chain and give them the key performance indicators to measure and have a quantitative analysis of how their suppliers are performing further upstream, we also have at least one improvement opportunity so that if one of your suppliers further up your supply chain isn't performing so well, you have a reference and a way to work with them to reduce the impact of whether it's environmental or social that is not performing so well. And we also take a full life cycle approach across all sectors. And so this allows retailers to have a 360-degree view of the impacts that are happening throughout their entire store. This is just a splash of our members. We have about 100 different member entities. Our members are critical. We're a consortium. We don't really exist without them. They provide the science, and they provide the review of the science that we turn into key performance indicators. So we actually have some members here. Thank you. Hi, Allison. And we do have a product category of wine that's available for members to use. To date, we've covered about 117 product categories, which covers about 80% of the impacts in the consumer goods industry. Within the food, beverage, and agriculture sector, that does include beer and coffee and wine. So those are available for retailers to begin using to measure and assess the sustainability of their supply chains or of their suppliers. I want to briefly mention, going back to that initial slide, that one of the challenges is there are multiple measurement and reporting systems, and we were created to kind of condense those. So where it was possible, we've aligned with existing initiatives. And so while, say, the Carbon Disclosure Project may want to dive deep into carbon, we'll look at all of the issues, but we align our metrics for greenhouse gas emissions on the farm or at processing with those same metrics that CDP is using. And this is really important for suppliers that may have to answer to the different surveys that are being sent to them. This is about communication. So we've spoken a lot about communication with consumers. That's challenging and that's difficult, especially when it comes to consumer education. Our approach is to improve the communication between buyers and suppliers. And so we enable that buyer-supplier conversation across retailers to be focused on the same sustainability issues. So it's not one single definition for sustainability, it's a single platform for sustainability. This is a brief example of a business tool that we can use to enable those conversations. So yes, our signature tool is to create key performance indicators to measure and assess sustainability over time. It's meant to improve continually year upon year. But then because we have this database that's so rich with environmental and social literature, we can also create tools that can facilitate those conversations. So I took coffee because it's very similar to wine, and as if you look at the major nodes of production, and plus because we don't have the wine one produced yet, sorry. But what we've done here is you can map and you can see that if I really want to look at sustainability issues, maybe a first place I want to prioritize is on the farm, because there's a handful, maybe half a dozen or more potential environmental or social issues that can be looked at on the farm. A place where there's fewer sustainability issues for coffee in particular is at retail. So this is one way that you can quickly visualize what's happening in a supply chain. Another challenge I spoke about when it comes to sustainability is that survey fatigue. So there is this space of, if you're supplying to multiple retailers. And if you're a retailer, you're buying from multiple suppliers. So you have this cross-connection, multiple conversations, really a waste of energy and money. Our theory of change is to simplify this reporting platform into this one sustainable conversation around sustainability so that each of those retailers and suppliers are speaking the same language and focusing on the same issues. So the content comes from TSC. We partner with SAP Product Stewardship Network to deliver that in a survey format and gather the data. And that data can be applied to every retailer that asks you for multiple data around the same product category. And so some of the benefits that we've heard from the retailers and brand manufacturers alike have been that this is comprehensive, scientific, and what I have heard most in my direct contact with the users is that it immediately identifies the areas of opportunity for improvement, so your risk areas, and also where you're performing well. So this can help you begin to prioritize within your own supply chain what to focus on. And finally, I'm going to close with a case study. We do work with multiple retailers. Walmart is our most well-known retailer, but we've also worked with Allhold here in Europe and Kroger, and we've got about 4 pilots with retailers in Europe about to be underway and half a dozen more, in the United States. So it's really exciting because the retailers are putting pressure on these sustainability issues to protect their own brand. What Walmart has done is they have surveyed their suppliers a couple of years now, and they've gathered the data, and they understand which brands are performing well. So they've developed this online store highlighting those sustainability leaders. So me as a consumer, I don't have to look at the label and understand what certifications mean. I can just go online and say, oh, I trust this brand. It's performing well sustainably. And it's had been very powerful.
Thank you so much for your invitation. So we will talk about emotion and neuromarketing. And my name is Vincenzo Russo. I'm the coordinator for one laboratory for neuromarketing in the Ulm University. The Ulm University is famous in Italy for consumer behavior and communication. And I think is the best way to start to talk about neuromarketing, watching a very short video. Okay, welcome to Neuromarketing Consumer Neuroscience, a very new science. So neuromarketing is a field of marketing that studies the effect of marketing stimuli on consumer cognitive and affective responses. Neuromarketing is the use of neuroscience insight and tools, for example, electroencephalography or instruments useful to analyze the skin conductance and so on, in order to better understand the consumer responses to different kind of a brand and product and service. But why is it important to use the neuromarketing tools? I'd like to start with a famous sentence of one of the first experts in advertising, the manager Wanamaker, who about 100 years ago said, half of the investment in advertising are wasted. The problem is, I don't know which half it is. This phrase shows has a huge difficulty we have in the evaluation of the efficacy of advertising and marketing in general. To understand the value of neuromarketing and the contribution that it can give to the research, we can start from another statement from David Ogilvy. David Ogilvy is one of the most well-known advertisers of the past century. He said, the trouble with market research is that people don't think how they feel. They don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. I repeat. The people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. This phrase raises twofold issues. The incapability of people to be fully conscious of their own reaction in front of the environmental and consumption stimuli, and the difficulty of expressing this feeling. The difficulty for market research to identify the deepest motivation that explain consumer behavior and having to predict their direction. Why does people not tell what they think? One of the reasons is that there are implicit and unconscious processes that emotionally activate the consumer that only after find their rational and conscious explanation. So we know that despite what consumers declare, the actual behavior can be very different. This explains the market failure of many products. We know, for example, that the 80% of the new products developed with traditional research analysis like questionnaire, focus group, interview, and so on, does not have a success on the market. And only 31 of the new products are successful and pass the launching phase, becoming product of success. For many years, we used a rationalistic model in the study of a consumer decision-making process. During the past century, we studied humans as rational entities. As one of the first neuroscientists, Richard Davidson, wrote, the emotion is the cognitive process was only an intervenient variable, a disturbing and primitive variable. As Davidson wrote, until a few years ago, it was considered the emotion ridiculous to study emotion in connection to decision. It was unacceptable by a scientific community influenced by the cognitivist approach. Emotions were relegated to a subcortical area of the brain, the primitive area, distant from the superior area of the cortex. Today, thanks to neuroscientific research, we have a new conceptualization of emotion and of the relation between rationality and emotion. Emotions are the key to understand people and their decision-making process. The emotion is not anymore seen as a disturbing variable, but as a core in decision-making process. Let's take the great contribution of Daniel Goleman, for instance, with his book, Emotional Intelligence. And this is a particular true for the world of the wine. Wine is emotion, the taste, the territories, the local identity are so connected to emotional meaning, and communication has the task to bring out this emotional strength and significance. Our sense and perception are actually influenced by emotion, and the perception can change our emotion as well. In opposition to the rational model of behavior starting in the 17th, and with the pioneiristic studies of Simon, Peter Cacioppo, Kahneman, Toeschi, a new way of conceiving the decision-making process was presented, bringing a radical change to the study of the consumer behavior, and so did to the sensorial analysis. Neuroscientific studies demonstrated that cognitive and emotive process, even if different in nature, are not separated and antagonistic, but strictly connected systems. Research on cognition is starting to show that the biological dimension of the body has a deep capacity to influence the mind. These studies demonstrate the prevalence of the emotional dimension in stimulus perception. In the same way, the olfactory system is tightly connected to the cerebral system of emotion, and this is also due to their physical proximity. The two processes, emotive and cognitive, have to be considered two distinct but interactive cerebral structures, mediated by different but very interactive brain systems. In recent years, neuroscientific research allows us to overcome the body-mind separation. We can cite two important theories, for example. The theory of the double way by Ledoux, you have the image on the right, which states that emotion act as, explain that the existence of two different paths that characterize brain functioning. The thalamic way is faster and more immediate, and it's emotional one, while the cortical way is slower, effortful, and it's the rational one. The second theory is Damasio somatic marker theory, which stated that emotion act as a somatic markers, acting decision-making more efficiently and faster to select choices. This is why we can affirm that we are not a thinking machine that can have emotion, but we are emotional machine that think. The situation is really changed, is the very opposite before many years ago. These are completely a new way of understanding human decision-making and the rational vision of the man. This tells us that the humans are made of emotion first and then of rationality. To demonstrate the role of emotion and expectation on the perception of the stimuli, I would like to start with a very well-known experiment on wine. This is one of the most works by a group of neuroscientists, Plasman and colleagues. They asked a group participants of experiment to taste 2 glasses of wine. They presented them as two different wines, one priced at $5 and the other $45. Then they asked the participants which wine they preferred, and all of them answered the $45 one, of course. In reality, the wine was the same. So far, nothing of new, nothing to be surprised of. It is known that because of a cognitive error, in particular for normal consumer, we perceive the most expensive product as better than the others. Is a bias, of course. However, the experiment had another interesting feature. In fact, while the participants were tasting the wine, their cerebral activation was being recorded with magnetic resonance imaging. As we can see in this chart, the activation is higher in area of the brain dedicated to the detection of stimuli of pleasure, when one thinks that the wine costs $25, compared to when one thinks that the wine costs $5. Knowing that a wine is expensive activated more the brain area dedicated to pleasure, and the stimulus was the same, really the same. The effect is higher if the wine is presented at $90 versus $10. Maybe. For this reason, the participant had a different perception of the same stimulus. But this is only the effect of the expectation, the communication that the price is different, 45 versus 5. Of course, these consumers are normal consumers, not expert, not sommelier. A similar experiment had been conducted by McClare in 2045 in the blind condition, confronting brain activation during the tasting of Coca-Cola and Pepsi with the same instrument, with the magnetic resonance. The researcher found that the same area related to the pleasantness was activated. They also found that in blind, their preferred drink was Pepsi. But in vision condition, when the participant knew they were drinking Coca-Cola, they preferred this drink, and the cerebral activation was different. You can find the different area activated in the blind situation compared with the situation when the people know that the drink was Coca-Cola. The area was so different. The activation in this case that we can see is the activation of hippocampus and another part of the brain dedicated to the memory. The Coca-Cola brand activated the brain area connected to memory, to perception of self-esteem, and to positive emotion. Expectation and hence communication can influence sensation, provoking certain emotion. Emotion in turn have an important role in driving the action and in the evaluation of a sensory stimuli. This is why it is important to have a direct evaluation of emotion provoked by the sensory stimuli. Only by directly measuring of emotion, not mediated of a rational process, like the use of an interview or questionnaire and so on, it is possible to better predict the future shopper decision and consumer behavior, increase the efficiency of a marketing communication strategy. All of these serves to engineer a high impact activity for the shopper to have high engagement, high attention, and a stronger memory encoding. Non-invasive neuromarketing techniques such as psychophysiological tools, eye tracking, skin conductance, and brain imaging tools, for example, from electroencephalography, made it possible to actively make a brain observation during the execution of certain tasks, providing marketers and me with additional information about consumers. So, to evaluate emotion, it is also possible to measure skin conductance and heart rate and the activity of the brain. Usually we prefer analyze the different activation for the prefrontal cortex because we know that the activation of this part of the brain, the right part of the prefrontal cortex, is connected with negative emotion, and this part is connected with the positive emotion. The strength of this instrument lay in their sensitivity to detect even the most feeble psychophysiological and neurological change, as well as their synchronization and integration. So we can use, of course, the cardiovascular system analysis and the electrodermal activities. thanks to the face reader, it is possible also to have an analysis of the emotion that we have in our face, and this offers an accurate and automated recording of muscular activity of the facial expression. In our neuromarketing laboratory, we measure emotion provoked by different stimuli. We do that integrating the new neuroscientific methods with the classical techniques like interview, questionnaire, and focus group. For instance, we use the eye tracker to measure a movement and evaluate the emotion provoked by a website or one image or a label. It is possible to measure the vision time of a single area and how many times a person looks back on the specific point of a web page. Of course, it's very interesting to use to analyze the effect and the efficacy of the label, discovering that different people, for example, have a different viewing patterns. In this chart, you can find the different pattern from sommelier versus inexpert. Sommelier is very different, very interesting to analyze that the sommelier look here of production, of course, and while non-expert focus on information that are more comprehensible to them, such alcoholic degree, organic label, and bottle capacity, that you know that actually is always the same, but they look at the bottle capacity. And we can find the same data, the bottle capacity and alcohol degree. It's also possible to make advertising more effective. This is another example from advertising campaign of wine in the USA. We can see that the human looks at us, and we are probably attracted by her look. This is the eye tracking output. It shows that the group of participants to the experiment look at the woman first and then at the brand of the wine. What if we want to improve the vision of the brand? This eye tracking output is a very joke. It's a very funny situation. It shows that the group of participants of the experiment look at the woman first and then the brain. But sorry. Here the solution offered by the eye tracker. We just modify the look of the woman. She looks at the bottle, so we are geared toward looking as the bottle as well. And this is the effect. In this way, the vision of the brand increases and therefore the brand awareness as well. Confronting the two images, we can immediately see the effect. The image on the right shows a higher vision of the brand. It's also possible to evaluate the brain activation in relation to a specific area of interest seen with the tracking. This is an example of the comparison between two versions of the same advertising. On the left, the image with a darker color, prepared for the Chinese market. On the right, the image with the typical colors used to promote wine in Italy, with the blue sky, a green vineyard. But which one is the most effective, for example, for a Chinese market? This is what we evaluated with the neuromarketing techniques. Showing the images to a sample of Chinese consumers, we see that the image on the left for this sample, of course, is more effective. The color blue on the image on the right distract more the Chinese sample from the text. By evaluating the physiological activation of the Chinese sample to the images with the different color of the sky, we see that the image with the blue sky generates high activation, but with a negative valence evaluated with the skin conductance and electromyography. In contrast, the image with the gold sky, typical for Chinese market, has the same high activation, but with the positive valence. With an Italian sample, we had the opposite results. Neuromarketing research is still in its infancy, and the actual research is in that direction has basically just started. Future research should support the creation of synergy between discipline to generate novel theory and insight at the intersection between marketing, neuroscience, psychology, and the science of sensory analysis, of course. The main areas of development are the ones related to the possibility to finding more efficient model of correlation between the data gathered with the neuromarketing tools and consumer choices, the opportunity of a better classification of neural patterns in relation to stimuli in world consumption and wine experience, and to establish a brain-behavior relationship meaningful for consumer behavior and wine experience. Finally, echoing the opening sentence of Winemaker, we could say that if we continue in this direction and we implement our research on the efficacy of neuromarketing, maybe we will be able to say that with neuromarketing it is easier, maybe it is easier, to identify which part of the advertising investment is wasted and give an important contribution to the science of the sensory analysis. Thank you.
Okay, so who would have thought of all these connections between the two subjects, the sustainability and the sensory analysis? I wouldn't have thought about those. Definitely not all the angles that were discussed here today. It's really exciting. Now, why we started yesterday about saying the role of sensory analysis in sustainability. And we kind of concluded yesterday that the sensory analysis is the enabling factor that brings into the sustainability discussion the consumer. It's the tool that empowers the consumer to contribute, to influence the sustainability discussion. So this is why we are discussing about sensory analysis in connection to sustainability. And I think this was reinforced during today. But moreover, sensory analysis gives us a structure. Gives us a structure for a dialogue between business, between producers and consumers. It builds on a vocabulary, makes us able to understand each other. But this is not to say that it's equal to standardizing or reducing diversity in terms of the offer for the consumer. I think the industry, while having, as Natasha was very nicely depicting these ideas on the chart on the left, while the industry has the obligation to be leaders to construct leadership in sustainability, it also has the obligation of providing sufficient diversity to consumers so that they are not captive in, very with small opportunities to contribute. Then the other thing that came for me very strongly during today is that sensory analysis is not something which is to be reserved for the very top experts. I mean, of course, they have their important role in the discussion, but you need to involve the consumers equally, or even internal reflection groups in your production company or process to lead to influence the end product. And this is, of course, with the proper training and with the proper structure, so that the results, their contribution is meaningful to the process. This is very much linked to the drive of certain producer groups to listen more and more structured to the consumers. Then we have talked a lot during today about how to choose a good wine. And the only thing I can say is that it's a complex decision system. And one element that is very much important or has been highlighted by you as being important is to identify which is the trigger factor for the decision. I mean, where do you start your decision process? And it, of course, is different for different markets, for different types of consumers, for different types of products. But there is always a trigger factor. Then the decision process is different if you have the chance. You said that it is different if you have the chance to taste it, to taste the wine or not. And I mean, linking it back to the sensory analysis discussion is, it's a subject for reflection. If you want to have a sector that is driven by the factors of the sensory factors for the consumer in choosing their product, then we might need to reflect on how do we present the product to the consumer. How do we present it in terms of retail availability of the product, so that they can also taste it, feel it, smell it, so on and so forth. But before going to the sensory profiling, there are also other factors that need to be taken into account. And we heard about issues related to culture, like in China, or the climate in South America, that we need to clarify those first, and then to go to profiling on sensory factors. Now, the last thing I want to say is that basically, at least for me, the message was, the take-home message was that sensory analysis is not a tool to say a wine is good or is bad, or is good quality or bad quality. Sensory analysis is to say if a wine is right. Is the right wine for me, or for me as a consumer, or for a certain group of consumers in the context in which they live. And that's the messages I wanted to share with you.
Thank you. And that's going to be so exciting to see in your report. Thanks a lot, Alex.
So I thought the last point what Alexandru was making, we have to select not good, bad, we have to select a proper wine. And if I make something what the drugs, people who are developing drugs, they recognize that when we make aspirin for all of us, it works great with you, it works okay with you, and it doesn't work with you. So we are all very, very different. And I think when brain research, when our development of our sensory techniques are getting a little bit more precise, I think especially looking for consumer response, we are not precise enough. Maybe we are also not precise enough from anything. But if we're more precise, we see that consumers are much more diverse than we think. And at the moment, it's like you have a group of people invited and you don't know what to cook because they're different. So you do something everybody likes. You do a pasta and you do something which is okay. And this is boring, of course, but you are not failing because everybody's kind of happy. No, we have to do it with like with the drugs, to be more specific. And sensory is the elemental point. And what does it have to do with sustainability? It's our different regions, it's our different varieties, it's our different traditions, which gives us this diversity. We just have to direct it more better, more precise, and that's, I think, what will be the future, aligned with some other better understanding how we as humans are functioning. And that's my message at the end.
Thank you very much, Ulrich Fischer. Ettore.
So I will try to summarize these two final questions. I mean, first of all, I think that we really we reached the goal of this conference in really having a kind of cross-fertilization between different experts. So it's interesting. I always love this term cross-fertilization because my background is soil science, and it is real. So there was clear humus here, and I think that it is clear, and we will today really leave a keystone that sustainability has the sensory analysis as one of the major metrics for achieving its goal. And this is today clear because of you, because of this conference, and because of these 2 days. Of course, there is a lot of work to do, it's clear, but we already started. And the work that should be done is a work that, of course, comprises education and training, which is clear, and, of course, include communication. But this should be done always in a very consistent way. So, I mean, because, I mean, otherwise, these words are just waste. We always say that we need education, we need training, we need information, but this is usually the typical justification of our politicians. And then maybe the money is spent in information that is absolutely useless. So for doing this, I think that is very clear that will be always consistent and transparent. And transparency and consistency is really the baseline of any activity that we do in sustainability program. And today with the sensory analysis, we are opening really a kind of holistic sense of the wine that include, of course, all the best practices, all our culture for achieving the common objective of the sustainability. So for doing transparent in a way to be transparent and consistent, I think that we should move as much as possible in the stakeholder engagement. And this is clear in these 2 days. So in the stakeholder, today we did a kind of stakeholder analysis, and that's really grateful to the methodology that Natasha is able to do in such a good way. And but of course we need engagement. And engagement should be realized with a different stakeholder platform, and should be realized in a really frequent events. So I mean we cannot go on today with a 2 years approach, but I'm sure that with this cross-fertilization we will start in so many places in doing and in applying this methodology that will be, of course, enforced time by time with demonstration actions and activities, because we need always very, very practical case studies. And for this reason, I mean, the future is for me is in this way, and the future will be that we will not only do this in Milano, but I was always talking with Stefano and Linda that for sure China should be very close than Asia, and then of course we have to work with what we started today in really in having this not globally thinking, really think globally and then act locally. So really I think that the step forward will be that everybody here, they will start in doing same activity and really in enhancing and amplifying this approach that I think will contribute only, but we will be the best way to achieve sustainability. And for this reason, I will do this, because at least me, I will work a lot on this issue. So that's my considerations.
Thank you so much, Ettore Capri, who was obviously responsible for yesterday's Congress, but we've seen that the bridges between the two Congresses have been very, very obvious from the beginning. So I think we've come to an end. What I'd like you to do is join me, please, in thanking all those who've been supporting this process taking off, which is the technicians. Thank you very much. And it's the translators. Thank you so much for your hard work. It's our wonderful photographer. Thank you. And those photographs will also be available on the website, I understand. They're fantastic. And where's Linda? Linda's back there. Linda organized everything with Stefano. Fantastic. Thank you. So that's it. And I believe...
First of all, I think that we have to really thank you very much. So I start with, when we opened the session, at the beginning of the conference, we say that without you, Natasha, this conference would never be possible. You're so great, and you were able in 2 days to keeping not only the attention, but to apply in really consistent way the methodology in the stakeholder analysis. It was clear also in the results of the survey. So I mean, you really achieved, in each point. I mean, it was fantastic. But because I mean, of you, of not only of the organization, but because you were able, as always, to keep so high, the concentration of everybody. So I think that Uli and me and Stefano and Alex that we were working, and Anita that we were working so strict in the organization of the conference, we really thank you very much.